Chaim. So we spoke before primarily about the Alter Rebbe himself and the story of the Alter Rebbe's redemption. I want to speak a little bit now about Chassidus, and in particular about the Sefer Tanya, which is the Alter Rebbe's main contribution and his first contribution to Chassidus. We all know, I'm sure, that the Alter Rebbe sat in jail for 53 days, and that was for the 53 chapters of Tanya. So it was quite clear that he was paying a price for every parak of Tanya that he wrote. He had to pay a price. And there was a direct correlation between his being in prison and the Tanya. The Tanya is the Torah Shebichsav of Chassidus. Just like in Torah we have the Chumash, the Tanakh, which is the written Torah, and then we have the whole Gemara, Mishnayos, Poskim, which is Torah Shebal Peh, based on Torah Shebichsav. So in Chassidus it's the same thing. So the Tanya is the Torah Shebichsav, and all the rest of Chassidus is based on and is there to explain and expand Tanya. But Tanya has it all. Now it must be that if the Alter Rebbe had to pay such a price for the Sefer HaTanya, and he had to have Mesiras Nefesh to produce the Tanya, and as we know from the time when the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid visited him in prison, and by the way, the Frierdiker Rebbe said that he went to see the cell in which the Alter Rebbe sat, and there was just enough room for 3 people. Which means that when the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid visited the Alter Rebbe, that's the implication of what the Frierdiker Rebbe said, it wasn't a spiritual encounter. They showed up. He had to make sure there was room for 3 people. And the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid told him that the reason why you're sitting in jail is because Lamaila, in heaven, the heavenly court has taken issue with what you're doing. They don't like it. They have a problem with it. So the Alter Rebbe said, okay, in that case, should I stop? And they said, no. Once you started, once you broke through, you have to continue. But we see that the creation of Chassidus was not simple. The Alter Rebbe had to fight. He had to fight with Beis Din Shalmaila. He had to fight with God, almost, so to speak. Like Yaakov in last week's Parsha, had to, when he encountered the angel of Esav, and he wrestled with the angel, and then the Malach told him, now we're going to call you Yisrael, Ki Sarisa im Elikim va'anoshim atuchol. You had to wrestle with Hashem, im Elikim, and you won. So the Alter Rebbe had to sort of wrestle and fight with the Eibishter over this Sefer called the Sefer HaTanya. We know that the Alter Rebbe was a neshama chadasha. He was a new soul. Most of us, we know from the Arizal, our souls are not new. They've been here before. It's called a Gilgul, right? We're reincarnations of previous souls. The souls come back because they have work to do, and that's the system. It's extremely rare, almost unheard of, that there should be a new soul that's never been here before, should come down into the world. Doesn't happen. The Alter Rebbe was a neshama chadash. He was a brand new soul. And what does that tell us? That his shlichus to this world, his contribution to the world was something so new, so revolutionary, so different, an old soul couldn't do it. A soul that had been here before, that was sort of already molded by the ways of the world, even the ways of the Torah, the ways of Kedusha in the world, couldn't do it. Davke, a neshama chadasha, a brand new soul with a clean slate, had the ability to be mamshich, to bring down this Chiddush. So the Tanya, again, it's not just another Sefer. We have Chumash, we have a Gemara, we have a Mishnayos, and we have a Tanya. The Tanya is a revolution. It's a Chiddush. And it took Mesiras Nefesh, it took a fight to make it happen. So I don't know that I'm the expert to say what's the tremendous Chiddush of the Tanya. what's so revolutionary about the Tanya? Superficially, when you learn Tanya, it's nice. Doesn't seem like it's so dangerously revolutionary that it took a Yud Tes Kislev to make it happen. So I don't know that I'm the expert to explain what's the Chiddush in Tanya. But a few, perhaps, observations just from the opening parak of Tanya, the Derech Efsher can give us some kind of an insight and appreciation as to the paradigm shift, the revolution that the Alter Rebbe made with the Tanya. Start with a very simple, the opening of Tanya, right? Tanya is called Sefer Shel Beinoni, the book of the Beinoni. And on the opening page of Tanya, which is not such an interesting and inspiring page of Tanya, it's quite a technical page. But basically, the Alter Rebbe comes to the following conclusion, that the entire world is wrong. He literally says, V'hadam rinun ba'alma. The whole world says something and the whole world is wrong. And with that he includes the Gemara and the Rambam. And basically, the entire world until the Alter Rebbe is wrong about something, and he's here to set the record straight. The first Chiddush, right? Right off the bat. Everybody until now was wrong. Chiddush. And that is in how we define a Beinoni and a Tzaddik. Until the Alter Rebbe, the entire world believed that a Beinoni, which we call the average person, that the middle person, is mechze zechuyos or mechze avainos. A Beinoni is a person who, if you weigh his entire life on a scale, it's about half-half, 50% good and 50% not so good. That's a Beinoni. What's a Tzaddik? A Tzaddik is roiv zechuyos. A Tzaddik has mostly positive, mostly good. The good outweighs the bad. This was the perspective, the outlook of the world from Matan Torah, perhaps even from Adam HaRishon, until the Alter Rebbe wrote Perek Aleph Tanya. Came the Alter Rebbe, the Neshama Chadasha, sat in jail for 53 days, fought with the Beis Din Shel Maila to say a gewaldike Chiddush, mind-blowing new idea. A Beinoni never sinned. Lo over aveira miyamav, he never sinned. V'lo yaver, he never will sin. A Beinoni never sinned. That's a Beinoni. And a Tzaddik, not only does a Tzaddik not sin, a Tzaddik doesn't even have a Yetzer Hara, so a Tzaddik is not even tempted to sin. The Beinoni is tempted, but he controls himself. So the Beinoni never sins. And a Tzaddik, not even tempted. He's only a Yetzer Tov. He only wants good, he loves Hashem, that's all, and he's smooth sailing. Yeah, this is the first opening of Tanya. And here one can ask the question, okay, fine, but what's the big deal? So you redefined what a Beinoni means, and you redefined what a Tzaddik means. What's the Chiddush? Why is this so important? Usually when you open up a book, the opening of the book is supposed to be some kind of a hook to get you to, right? The author brings his best shot. He wants to catch you. He wants to surprise you. He wants to chop you in the beginning. So he's going to tell you something that's going to catch your attention. It doesn't seem to be all that amazing. Okay, fine. So a Beinoni doesn't sin, and a Tzaddik has no Yetzer Hara, and fine. Your point? But I think if we think about it a little more, perhaps this is, again, B'derech Efsher, possibly, this might be the Chiddush of the Tanya. And something which, yes, takes Mesiras Nefesh, and it takes sitting in jail, and it takes fighting with the Eibishter to make this revolution. Why did the world, until the Alter Rebbe, define Tzaddik and a Beinoni in this way? Why? Why was a Tzaddik always believed to be Roiv Zechuyos, mostly merits, and a Beinoni half-half? For a very simple reason. Nobody ever imagined for a second that it was possible to not sin. Pasha, to never do an Aveira, to never sin, it's not possible. And it's a befeirish pasuk. It's a clear pasuk. Ein tzaddik ba'aretz. There's no righteous man in the world. Asher yaseh toiv, that does good and doesn't sin. And besides the pasuk, we all know from ourselves, right? As we can try very hard and we can be good most of the time, but Averas like Yichveis Lashon Hara, Bittul Torah, to never do an Avera, it's impossible. So if that's the given, if that's the default setting, right, that never to sin is clearly impossible, and it doesn't take a scientist to understand that, it's quite obvious and clear and simple. So if it's impossible to truly not sin, so what's the next best thing? To sin less than you do good, right? Do more good than you sin. Okay, so that's a tzaddik. Right? The highest level that you can possibly think of, a tzaddik, a person who's roiv zechuyos. And if a tzaddik is mostly zechusim, so what's a Beinoni? Okay, half-half. So that's the starting position, and that's common sense. Came the Alter Rebbe, and Alter Rebbe said, a Chiddush. Not only is it possible to not sin, not sinning, that's a Beinoni. That's for the average person. The average person doesn't sin. A tzaddik is something else entirely. So, right away you see here this huge turnaround. We went from a position where it's unimaginable to even contemplate the possibility of not sinning until the Alter Rebbe, to the Alter Rebbe saying not sinning is easy stuff. That's for the Beinoni. Midas ha-Beinoni, he midas kol. Everybody's expected to be a Beinoni. If you spent your whole life not sinning, ever, not even in thought, speech, or action, don't be proud of yourself. You're just an average guy or an average woman. So this is a huge shift. This is a major change of perspective. What is the underlying change? And this is the point of Chassidus. Why was the world under the impression that it's impossible to not sin? Or when, in which reality is not sinning impossible? So in a reality, to borrow terms of Chassidus, in a reality where oilemis bepashtus, where the world exists, the world is real, what we see and hear, what we experience is the ultimate reality. And elikus is behischachus, godliness is the novelty, God is the chiddush, oh yeah, Hashem exists. That the table exists, that the house exists, that the food exists, that's for sure. That's bepashtus. Elikus is the chiddush. In such a reality, not sinning is impossible. If your reality, if your real is gashmius, if what's real to you is physical, and elikus is distant, elikus is a chiddush, it's one step above, it's removed, how are you going to not sin? So not sinning is impossible. The best you could do is roiv zechuyos. Be mostly good. What's the Iker Chiddush of Chassidus? What was the essential revolutionary concept of Chassidus? To flip that script. It's not that the world is for granted, that the world is a Metzias, the world exists, and the Eibishter possibly exists. Adarabah. Completely the opposite. Elikus is b'pshitus. What's simple, what's given, what's obvious, what's real, what's absolute is the Eibishter. Einoid milvadai. There's nothing else besides for Hashem. The Yesh HaAmiti, the true existence, is Hashem. The question which Chassidus sort of dabbles with and has a problem with is, what do we do with the world? That the Eibishter exists is for sure. That the Eibishter is real is for sure. The world, that's a problem. Is there a world? Is there no world? Perhaps it's an illusion, as one mimer suggests. But on the other hand, it says, Bereshis bara Elokim. If the Torah says the world exists, the world must exist. You understand? If you only perceive of the world as an existence because the Torah told you, Bereshis bara Elokim, then you're a chassid. So from that perspective, what's real is the Eibishter, is a likus, and you struggle with the existence of the world. Is there a world? Is there no world? In that reality, it's a chiddush to sin. How can you sin How can you even contemplate sinning in a world where the realness is the Eibishter? And Olam Hazeh is a Chiddush. Olam Hazeh is distant. To make it a little more lamata me'asara tvachim, down to earth, think about Perek Memalef of Tanya, right? Chapter 41. Chapter 41, the Alter Rebbe says famously, famous because the Rebbe made it famous, right? V'hinei Hashem nitzav olav, that every person has to think that the Eibishter is standing on top of you. U'mabit olav, Hashem is looking at you, right? And He's watching you. V'lachin tzarich la'amid lefanav be'ema v'yirak oimid lifnei HaMelech. So you have to basically see yourself as standing before Hashem as if you were standing before a king. And we all experience this, right? I said, imagine the Rebbe came in and sat at the table. Imagine the Rebbe walked into the room. So, I'm sure nobody here, no matter how wild your Nefesh HaBahamis is, but if the Rebbe was sitting here, I'm pretty sure nobody would have the gall or the chutzpah or even the desire to chas v'shalom do anything wrong. It's impossible. You're in the presence of the Melech, of the king. You feel the king. You see the king. He's right here. He's watching you. You can't. You'd have to run outside and do it. But here, in front of the Rebbe, you wouldn't be able to. So, the Eibishter is at every moment. The Eibishter is present and watching and standing on top of us, not to scare us, but the Eibishter is everywhere, and He's looking at us and He's watching us, and we're always in the presence of Hashem. So why do we sin? For a very simple reason, because the Hashem being here, we all believe it. Yeah, of course Hashem, but it's abstract. It's distant. The food, the table, the guy sitting next to you, you relate to as a gashmistic thing is real. So that affects you that impacts you in a strong way. Hashem being here, it's true, Hashem is here, but because He's distant, it's a Chiddush, as we said, so it doesn't affect you. What's the point of Chassidus, if we can say, what's the Chiddush of Chassidus? What did Chassidus come to change is this point. That we can and we need to relate to the Eibishter in a very real way. And Chassidus gives us the ability to do this. How? It's a different story. But if a chassid learns Chassidus and davens and follows what the Rabbeim tell us, and you follow the manual of the Sefer HaTanya, what changes is that all of a sudden your reality, what's real to you is the Eibishter. The world, that becomes a question. So then when you hear a story about the chassid like Beinoni Kletzger, of the chassid of the Alter Rebbe, who was a lumber merchant, and he was a businessman. He went to work. He was in the forest telling them to cut trees, and he was managing a lumber company. But when he finished, when he was making a cheshbon, when he was making an accounting of numbers, what he invested, what profits he made, what was the bottom line when he finished the whole cheshbon? Ein od milvadai. And he wasn't being cute. Because the money, the business, that was to him distant. That was not who he was. What was real to him was Ein od milvadai. There's nothing else besides for Hashem. Or as another story about him goes, he was again in the forest, and all of a sudden he began to meditate on a Hasidic concept while his workers were working, and he put his foot, he leaned his foot on a wagon, I think it was, and meanwhile the wagon went off, and he was oblivious, and he stayed that way for many hours until finally he came back to himself, and he didn't know where he was. So these are examples of Chassidim who, yes, they were business people like us. They went to work, they had a parnasa, they had employees, they had bills to pay. But even with that wasn't their reality. What was real to them was Elikus, was the Eibishter. So in that space, in that dimension, where Elikus, godliness is bepashtus, and the world is the Chiddush, the world is the question. So in that world, even a Beinoni, a simple person, a regular person doesn't sin. And that's why the sort of the world at the time was so opposed to the Tanya. And it was like the catchphrase, if they caught, right, we read the stories of Rashbats, that they caught him reading a book, and if they saw the word tzaddik and Beinoni, you were in trouble, right? The tzaddik and Beinoni, those terms became like the sort of the catchphrase for, if you're studying about a tzaddik and a Beinoni, you're a chassid, and we have a problem with you. That became the calling card of the Chassidim. Because this is, if you want to say, this is the point. This is the Chiddush of the Tanya. We don't have to live in a world, we don't have to live in a reality where gashmius and money and kavod and luxury and houses and vacations and cars, that's life. And if we're lucky, we'll come to a shir Chassidus once in a while, we'll come to shul once in a while, we'll get inspired once in a while. This whole idea of getting inspired, by the way, doesn't make sense. What do you mean you're getting inspired? That's like, when you say you're getting inspired, you're basically saying my default position is not this. I'm generally somewhere else. And once a month, I get inspired. It's like, imagine a person says, yeah, usually I lie in bed all day, and all, but once I get inspired to go to work sometimes. That's not a healthy person. Going to work is what you need to do. It's your responsibility. So a real chassid doesn't have to get inspired. A real chassid who learns Chassidus every day and davens every day and does what the Rabbeim tell us to do, the inspiration that you need is to go into the world. How do you tear yourself away from Elikus and go to work? That takes inspiration. How do you leave the Beis Medrash? How do you leave the Shir? How do you leave the Farbrengen and go back to the Yaakov Halach L'Darkei? That takes inspiration. So I understand, I'm speaking on a very high level. But each person on his and her own way should take this Nakuda, that what Chassidus came to do, what the Alter Rebbe came to do, what the Tanya came to do, is this change of perspective, this change of this shift in reality. Instead of living in a Gashmius-centric universe, we have to start living in a Elikus-centric universe, where everything is Elikus. Elikus is real, the Eibishter is real, Chassidus is real. And in that mindset, we could all be a Beinoni. So l'chaim. Should be zeicher this Yud Tes Kislev. It's a new year. Lashana Tova, Belimud Chassidus, Bedarkei Chassidus, Tikaseivu v'Seichoseimu. L'chaim.
Last shall we please finish off the evening with Daled Levels.